on average about 4 times more valuable than another position player. And so when you're looking at the Minnesota Vikings, if you get above average quarterback play for the last 2 years, and you look at what the Vikings have been able to accomplish at the position over the past 10 years, Kirk ends up rising to the top because he's had 2 pretty good seasons in a row where he's played a lot of snaps, and on each of those snaps, he's playing above average play. So he ends up, generating the most win shares, despite plenty of other players on the Vikings playing really well at other positions.
So that's what the formula says, Eric, and that's what the stats say. As someone who has watched Kirk Cousins and the Vikings play a lot, are you buying what the information is telling you?
I think so. I mean, so the really tricky part is, the counterfactual. So when you put a, practice squad player at the quarterback position for the Vikings, do they lose? So Kirk's in that 2 wins above replacement, 2.5, I think, in his best season. So let's say you went in and put Nathan Peterman or Mike Glennon on the Vikings the last year. I think it's pretty safe to say that given everything, they're a 6-win team in 2017 or 2018, I'm sorry, and an 8-8 team at best last year. So it does check out. Whereas you look at other positions, and it just simply doesn't move the needle very much, right? So you lose Harrison Smith for a few games in 2015, they win some of those games. You lose Adam Thielen for a bunch of games last year, and they win some of those games. Whereas when you put, replacement level play at the quarterback position, it's just really difficult to win in the NFL. And so the bar is a lot lower for quarterbacks in terms of replacement level, but then also play for play, they control so much that, even though I think Kirk leaves Vikings fans wanting more, he has been a very valuable piece and has been paid as such.
So you've touched on an interesting topic here, and I think everything that you're saying Pro Football Focus has found with the WAR metric and the value placed on the quarterback position. I think Las Vegas would echo a lot of those same things when you see top quarterbacks out on an injury report, spreads will move 5, 6, maybe 7 points if it's a Tom Brady versus, some scrub backup. But if J.J. Watt is out for the Texans compared to if Deshaun Watson is out, the spread might not move that much. So what are the biggest reasons why, even though our perception would say, wow, if the Vikings are without Adam Thielen, or man, if Danielle Hunter is out, the Vikings are screwed, right? How are they going to get a pass rush? How and why is it that quarterbacks are just measurably more valuable? Is it because they are controlling so much of the action and touching the ball? How do you explain that gap to fans?
It's interesting. So that in football, almost every position except for 1 and maybe 2 is a weak link system. So, I remember the 2013 Vikings season very, very explicitly when they lost Antoine Winfield and had to play Josh Robinson out of position in the nickel, and the whole thing fell apart. Even though Robinson was like their 8th best player on the defense, the fact that he was terrible tore the entire thing apart. On the offensive line, it's sort of the same thing where, Riley Reif is an average offensive lineman, and then when there's 4 other offensive linemen playing averagely next to him, it's fine. It's when TJ Clemmings comes in and plays terribly, the whole thing collapses. So when you look at that, so it's not necessarily the Harrison Smith being out, for example, or the Adam Thielen being out. It's the weakest link being out, which we don't actually think is all that valuable. And so what that does is it suppresses the value of the higher end players. As you said, there's probably maybe half a dozen players in the NFL that will actually move the Vegas spread a half a point when they're out that aren't quarterbacks. But when you look at quarterbacks, they control so much. So, for example, a guy like Danielle Hunter is getting pressure on only 20% of his snaps, and he's really good. But that's a fifth of plays that he's having even an impact on. Kirk, we've noticed, quarterbacks control their pressure rate, so he controls that part more than the offensive line does. So he controls that. He throws the passes to the open receivers, right? So he controls one of the skills that receivers have, which is getting open and getting the football. There's so much that depends upon him, whereas all the other positions are so interconnected that it elevates the value of perceived, sort of like, ancillary pieces and depresses the value of supposed elite pieces.
So what does this tell us about the yay or nay about potentially devoting a decent portion of your salary cap to a Dalvin Cook extension then?
I just can't see it being good for the Vikings. The really hard part is when you and I wrote an article about this on PFF.com a couple weeks ago, and specifically about quarterbacks. The only quarterbacks where when you've given them a big deal have worked out are the Andrew Luck, the Russell Wilson, the quarterbacks that elevate the play of those around them, right? Because when you pour resources into one position, that player has to elevate what are going to end up being either young or cheaply paid players at other positions. Running backs, so quarterbacks can do that. They control so much that they can. We see DK Metcalf and a terrible offensive line in Seattle, and they're still fine. Running backs, they're actually on the other side. Running backs, the table is set for them by other people. It's set for them by the Kubiaks of the world. It's set for them by the offensive line. It's set for them by the fact that you need two high safeties to cover Diggs and Thielen last year. All those things. So Cook is a beneficiary of a lot of things and isn't actually a catalyst for much of anything. So when you pay him that much money, you're taking away resources from the table that's being set for him. And to me, it just doesn't. That's why rookie running backs generally do okay, and then when you pay them, you see what you saw with Todd Gurley, Devontae Freeman just recently, Melvin Gordon. So it's going to be a tough one because he's a great football player and he's fun to watch. But the smart move for the Vikings is not to pay him.
Eric, shoot me down if you think I'm wrong on this, but let me play devil's advocate on this. If Dalvin Cook is used in a similar fashion to how Christian McCaffrey is used in Carolina, where essentially his one salary in Carolina is taking up two players worth of production. Like, this is a dude who he touches the ball over 400 times. Now, the other shoe to drop is, all right, how long can you keep doing that until you're just unable to play football anymore? But if you're a guy who's going to get the ball 250 times, in handoff form and go for 1,000+ yards, and then you're also going to get targeted 100+ times and catch almost 100 passes, and you're making, he makes 15 or 16. Let's say Dalvin makes between $12 and $15 million. If the usage rate is that high, does it justify paying a Dalvin Cook at least for the next 2 or 3 years in terms of guaranteed money?
Yeah, the hard part is the arrow generally points in the other direction. So, and this is unfair a little bit because Carolina played with 3 quarterbacks last year, but McCaffrey was brilliant, and that team was still 25th in yards per play, on offense. And the tricky part is when you pay a running back that much, it's the other way. You force yourself to give him touches to justify the deal. We saw that at Adrian Peterson in this town. We saw it over and over again. And the hard part is that plays to running backs when they're intentional are not valuable plays. Throwing the ball to a receiver or tight end is, if the pass is attempted, is over 1/10 of an expected point positively per play, sometimes over 2/10 of a point. Throwing the ball to running back is, generally speaking, a negative expected value play because the depth of target is so low, right? So when you throw the ball to Thielen, he's entering the play 8 to 10 yards downfield. There's already value on the catch point. Whereas with a running back, when he catches the football at the line of scrimmage, he has to do things beyond that just to make that play into a valuable play. And so as good as the back is, and McCaffrey was terrific, what he was doing was he was taking receptions and taking yards and expected points away from receivers on those plays. And so even though he did the best that he could with them, they were still a little lower than if an offense had a more sort of spread out thing. So what I fear with Minnesota is when you get Cook in there and you give him that deal, it might just be a necessity because their receivers aren't as good as they were in seasons past, but you're going to opt to throw the 1-yard pass to Cook when you should be throwing the 15-yard pass to Thielen, just incrementally more. And on the balance, that makes your offense a little less efficient.
Do you think that going into 2020, the Vikings offensively, who might be decent, but do you think offensively they get what the championship formula of 2020 is?
No, the real test is going to be what Stefanski does in Cleveland, because I think the real tricky thing about Stefanski was that I thought he did a great job of calling the actual plays, but he did so with the restrictions on him by Zimmer to run the football. Because the Vikings, in my opinion, they had a great season offensively last year, but their one their one black mark was the fact that they ran the ball too much on early down. And they got bailed out a little bit because Dalvin Cook was good. They got bailed out a lot because they didn't have to score on every drive because the defense was good and they played a weaker schedule of quarterbacks. Fast forward this year, I think they're still going to have, I think Cleveland, if they throw the ball more, we're going to find out that Zimmer was the one sort of pulling the puppet strings as far as a run-pass ratio.
Mm-hmm.
If they keep that run-pass ratio this year with Kubiak playing, a far harder schedule of quarterbacks and, not having that second receiver in Diggs, who's terrific, I think it's going to be really, really hard for them. The running games that win in the NFL are few and far between, and they include something that the Vikings simply don't have, which is just an outlier piece, which is the Shanahan play calling in San Francisco and the Lamar Jackson just freakiness in Baltimore. And if any team like Minnesota is trying to chase those, I think they're going to lose spectacularly.
Is there also a potential conflict in the art of trying to make Kirk look as good as possible and actually being as productive as possible?
There is. That's the hard thing. When you have to run, so there's a myth that you have to run the football effectively for play action to work. But if you believe that, then you have to run the ball on early downs so that the play action stuff does make Kirk better. Play action makes every quarterback better, but Kirk, I think especially, is really good at a lot of those plays where he's got an open pocket and he can set his feet and stuff. The hard part is that the aim there, the means to the end is running the football too much. And in a season where they're not getting to play David Blau and Daniel Jones and Chase Daniel and Matt Moore, and when they have to play an actual set of quarterbacks, they're going to be behind just incrementally more, and the defense isn't quite as good with all the corners and Everson Griffin gone. So it might look worse because they're going to be stuck in shotgun, behind and throwing the football more. Even though that, probably, Kirk will be fine. It'll just, the aim of making him look better, which is to play this sort of 1990s football, is I just don't think long term it's good for the Vikings.
Yeah. That's Eric Eager, our friend from Pro Football Focus. And just back to the beginning of the conversation, Kirk Cousins by Pro Football Focus and their wins above replacement measurement named the best Vikings player, most valuable Vikings player of the last 10 years. Hey, real quick, who were some of the other candidates? I'm guessing it was Brett Favre on that list just solely because of his 2000. Well, no, that's before. That wouldn't have made it for last decade.
Yeah, 2010, I think he was below replacement player. He was so bad that year. It's so funny. He's got two of the 06 and 2010 were the worst seasons. Favre was terrible in those years, and then randomly in 09, one of the best. So how we had it, among quarterbacks, the two Kirk seasons, Case's season in 2017, Bradford's season in 2016 was just edged out Bridgewater as a rookie, and then Bridgewater as a second-year player was the fifth most valuable of the decade. And then you're getting into the Ponders and stuff like that, and those guys barely worth anything. But if you look at non-quarterbacks, Adam Thielen's 2018 season was the most valuable non-quarterback season we've seen this decade. So a lot of volume and a lot of productivity. Harrison Smith has 3 of the top 6 in terms of most valuable non-quarterbacks for the Vikings over the past decade.
So off of the year the Case popped up and played so well, which nobody saw coming. Going into 2020, how many backup quarterbacks exist in this league who wouldn't absolutely submarine their current team?
Oh, that's a great. I actually wrote about this last week because there's 16 quarterbacks in the NFL that I classify, backup quarterbacks that I identified as veterans with little to no chance of ever starting in the league again. And that's 16. That's half. And Sean Mannion, I think, is in that group. Of players who are backups that aren't first-round picks, I think Andy Dalton, if pressed into work in Dallas, could be really good, especially with Mike McCarthy. I think Mariota with the Las Vegas Raiders, if Gruden and he click, would be excellent. And I think this one's easy. I mean, Jameis Winston with the New Orleans Saints. I mean, a guy that can lead the league in passing yardage, is one of the top players in terms of yards per pass attempt, and the second highest player last year in terms of things we call positively graded throws. Jameis makes positive plays like no one else. He also makes negative plays like no one else. If he could find a coach that could harness the good and eliminate the bad, he could be terrific. And so I think there are some. I mean, if you're looking for like a really long shot, maybe it's somebody like Nick Mullins for San Francisco. I know he played really well for the period of time he played in 2018 when Garoppolo was hurt. But a lot of these guys are just, a lot of these guys are what Case ended up being, which was, a really well paid and really well respected backup, which is not a bad gig if you can get it.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, thanks for coming on, man. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, man.
Take care, guys.
Appreciate it.
That's our friend Eric Eager. And it is, I think, as he lays out sort of the most valuable Viking seasons of the last 10 years, the previous decade, it does match the eye test too. You'd say, okay, yeah, Kirk Cousins has had a couple really good, especially feasting on some of those noon games, regular season numbers. So you'd probably have the 2 Kirk Cousins seasons, and then the Case Keenum season kind of right in below that, and then the Sam Bradford season, followed by Teddy Bridgewater mostly game managing for his first couple of years. So their metrics fit what I would probably recall my eye test saying as well.
So would you say that, back to the question I asked him as a stats guy, Phil Mackey, would you say not that this is the Vikings offense is going to be bad or awful, but do you think that the way they choose to do things is conducive to trying to win a Super Bowl? Because I think that's the ultimate question. Not does it look good? Does it serve to be on the right track to try and win a Super Bowl?
My short answer is I need to see more in this post Stephon Diggs. I need to see what they look like this year. If their goal is to go out and lead the NFL in rushing attempts and essentially just try to play 1990s football, I think that's a really, really safe way to assure that you don't train wreck. I think that like what the Vikings have, if they're looking to just limit Kirk Cousins throwing bad picks or whatever it is, and they're looking to lean on their pass rushers, and like their defense is not going to be as dominant as it was 2 years ago, certainly 3 years ago. I think it's a really good recipe for making sure that you for sure go 8-8. I don't think it's a great recipe,
which is not the goal though.
Right, and
like,
that's
the recipe for not train wrecking. To your point,
that's where I'm at with this franchise. And that's in all of our debates before the draft too.
Yep.
On Mackey and Judd, which by the way you can find our other podcast, Mackey and Judd, Apple, Spotify, and ScoreNorth.com. I'm so sick of this franchise not winning a Super Bowl, and so if it means and listen, this is not anti Kirk Cousins, but if there were to have been a chance to grab Tua and there wasn't, like they just weren't going to be able to trade up that high.
Right.
Our conversation was more about like if he starts to fall, and the debate was about but like you can't give up Kirk Cousins, he's a top 10 quarterback. Whether it's evaluating your quarterback, evaluating your system, evaluating your head coach, everything should be geared toward winning a Super Bowl. And to me, playing ball control 1990s football as a way to sort of like limit potential damage, make sure that
keep your defense fresh,
time of possession.
It's about the defense, yeah.
And I get all those things, and I'm not saying that there's zero value in running the ball. There is value in running the ball.
Yep.
But if your goal is let's just make sure that we don't train wreck, let's just make sure that we take the ball out of our quarterback's hands in certain situations and give it to the running back and the defense. That's a great way to go 8-8, 9-7. I don't think it's a great way. I don't think it's a great way to beat the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC this year. I don't think it's a great way to beat the Kansas City Chiefs and Pat Mahomes in a Super Bowl if you get there.
I think too that among the things that we can say, well, we think this and the Vikings think that, and often we come back to, well, they're probably right. I think the one thing that we keep hearing from very smart football people that's a fundamental misunderstanding by the Vikings where other people are right is their misinterpretation of what the running back position should do and should be right now. Don't you? It's
so much harder than when you have like one of the 3 best running backs. I think everyone's on the same page. If you don't have one of the 3 best running backs, don't pay him. The discussion is more like,
but Mike wants to run the ball. Like Mike wants to ground and pound. Mike sees this as damn it, the Dallas Cowboys did this, and so we can. And really smart football people in 2020 are basically saying, no, that did work. Ship has sailed.
Right. Eric brought up a great point, and we should do another episode just kind of diving into your question about, is this the Super Bowl blueprint from a play calling standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, everything philosophically. But the eye test would tell you last year, the Vikings, they tended to run the ball a lot on first and second down. It felt like, relative to the rest of the league. And Eric essentially brought that up anecdotally, said, yeah, the Vikings systematically leaned on running the ball too often early. It's great. Hey, when you hand the ball off on first down or you hand the ball off on 2nd and 8 or 2nd and 9, when you do get 5 or 6 yards, it's great because now you're in 2nd and 4. Now you're in 3rd and 1 or whatever it is, right? But what about the times when you run for 1 yard, 2 yards, which is also very frequent? Now you're putting yourself in tough spots. Like philosophically, are you doing too much of those things? That's probably to be flushed out on a different episode. But for now, thank you all for hanging out with us on Purple Daily. I'm Phil Mackey. That's Judd Zolgad. We'll see you next time.